Welcome everyone to today's webinar. You've arrived at our webinar, How to Comply with Bioengineered Food Disclosure Laws, presented by ESHA Research. A little bit about ESHA Research for anyone who's not aware of us. We've been around for, let's see, 41 years now it's been, and we basically specialize in nutrition analysis and labeling compliance solutions. We now offer solutions for food formulation, supplement formulation, nutrition and diet analysis, and we also do consulting services for people that don't have our software. Today's conversation will be about Genesis R&D Foods, specialized for food manufacturers and food service. It was established in 1991 when the initial regulations came out for food labeling, and this is the leading solution in the industry for exactly that: product development, formulation analysis, help with menu analysis, reporting, and regulatory compliance. A little housekeeping, we have some upcoming webinars as well. On March 18th, we'll be doing nutrition facts, label settings in Genesis R&D and brushing up on that. And then on April 15th, we're doing Genesis R&D Food and Nutrition Reports overview, and we'll dive into reports. Please note, the webinar is being recorded today, so you can put down your pens and papers if you're taking notes. It takes us a couple hours usually to get that out. All webinars will be also posted to our webpage, and we'll have links to that as well for follow-up. Submit your questions. If you have any questions in the GoToWebinar control panel, we'll do our best to answer those as they come up in the chat, and then we'll have a short Q&A afterwards at the end of the presentation. And then we'll email you a copy of the recording, the slides following the webinar, and address any pertinent questions and answers. If your questions don't get answered today during the broadcast, we will have a team following up personally with those chats. With that, I will hand the mic over to my esteemed colleague, Alicia, for further.
Thank you, Chris. And thank you everyone for joining us today for this webinar on the National Bioengineered Food Disclosure Standard. Topics we'll be discussing today include the dates that you need to be aware of, what is and what is not considered a bioengineered food, disclosure options, record keeping, and I'll show you the bioengineered attributes feature in Genesis R&D. In December 2018, the USDA announced the National Bioengineered Food Disclosure Standard, which outlines the way that industry is to disclose to U.S. consumers the use of foods that are or may be bioengineered or contain bioengineered ingredients. I'll highlight some of the regulation, but I want you to be aware that the USDA Agricultural Marketing Service has a website devoted to the BE standard, and we provided the link for you here. The AMS website provides overview, further discussion, and a very helpful collection of Q&A on this topic. The National Bioengineered Food Disclosure Standard defines bioengineered foods as those that contain detectable genetic material that has been modified through certain lab techniques and cannot be created through conventional breeding or found in nature. For the purpose of the standard, the terms bioengineered, bioengineered foods, and bioengineered ingredients follow the language to be used, and the disclosure reveals inclusion or presence of bioengineered material in the food. We have a few dates that we're working with regarding the standard. January 1st, 2020 was the implementation date for the standard, so we've already passed that date. January 1st, 2021 is the implementation date for small businesses, which are entities with $2.5 million to less than $10 million in annual sales. And then we have January 1st, 2022, which is the mandatory compliance date for the National Bioengineered Food Disclosure Standard. So what do these dates mean? According to the AMS, the implementation period is when entities should prepare to comply with the standard. And this means reviewing foods and formulas and the sources of ingredients. You want to be gathering documentation that supports BE declarations and understand exemptions and documenting those exempt foods properly. Companies can choose to begin declaring BE on products during the implementation period, and you've probably already seen some declarations already. Declaration at this time is considered voluntary, but if you choose to declare, you want to know how to and follow the rules of the standard correctly. And the mandatory compliance date of January 1st, 2022 is when foods entering into commerce must be labeled in compliance with the standard. So this is when the food is labeled or when the food is packaged in the container with the compliant BE labeling. Who must declare? Entities subject to disclosure are food and dietary supplement manufacturers, retailers of packaged and bulk foods, and importers of foods. Depending on the food served or sold, some may require BE disclosure and some may not. Exemptions to the standard include foods served in restaurants or similar food establishments, very small food manufacturers with less than $2.5 million in annual receipts, certified organic foods, food derived from an animal that was fed a BE substance. So that means just because an animal was fed with BE derived feed does not automatically make that animal a BE product. And foods that contain up to 5% inadvertent or unavoidable BE material per ingredient. Meat, poultry, and eggs are exempt. Mixed foods where meat, poultry, or eggs is the first ingredient, and mixed foods where broth, stock, or water, or a similar consistency type in item is the first ingredient, and meat, poultry, or eggs is the second ingredient. To further define some of the terms that the standard lists, the following as similar retail food establishments fall under the exemptions. And these are cafeterias and lunchrooms, food stands, food trucks, planes, trains, and other transportation carriers, bars, taverns, lounges, even your local saloon. Other similar establishments that sell prepared food to the public and things like salad bars and delis and the like that are located within retail establishments and provide ready-to-eat foods that are consumed either on or outside the retailer's premises. Some ingredients are highly processed and they contain non-detectable amounts of BE material, even when produced from BE crops. So highly refined products that don't show detectable amounts of BE material are considered exempt from BE disclosure since they don't meet the definition of bioengineered per the standard. And it has been validated that some refining processes result in products containing no detectable BE material. So following validated refining processes can serve as a method to ensure that no BE material is present in a highly refined product. The AMS has stated that they will provide additional guidance regarding the use of validated refining processes, so look for more information as we move towards the compliance date. The standard states an allowable threshold of up to 5% inadvertent BE material present per ingredient. This threshold acknowledges that BE and non-BE ingredients might be grown, harvested, transported, and processed near each other or using the same equipment. Inadvertent or technically unavoidable refers to unintentional presence of BE material despite reasonable efforts to keep ingredients separate. For instance, if machinery is used for both BE and non-BE ingredients and reasonable efforts are made to remove the BE material, but some might remain at less than 5%, then this is considered inadvertent or technically unavoidable. On the other hand, if your formula calls for non-BE ingredient, you run out of that ingredient and then you substitute a bioengineered ingredient due to availability or lack thereof, such a substitution isn't considered unintentional or unavoidable, and that doesn't fall under the allowed threshold example. I mentioned the Exemptions to the standard apply to certain foods that contain meats, poultry, eggs, and catfish. So let's take a closer look at that. If the first ingredient in a food is subject to the Federal Meat Inspection Act, the Poultry Products Inspection Act, or the Eggs Product Inspection Act, or if the first ingredient is broth, stock, water, or similar, and the second ingredient is subject to one of those inspection acts, then the food is exempt from BE disclosure. And I mentioned catfish here because it falls under the Federal Meat Inspection Act, and the AMS does mention that in their information, along with other examples of meats and poultry like pork, goat, turkey, domesticated birds. So there is a little bit larger list of items that you need to consider for the exemption. Some exempt foods can voluntarily declare BE content, but not these particular foods that fall under this exemption. AMS has stated that they will refer to ingredients in the order in which they appear on the ingredient list of a food. Ingredient lists, as we know, are arranged in descending order by weight of ingredients. And with that in mind, let's take a look at some example ingredient lists to see how we might determine if BE disclosure is necessary. For the first example we see here, the first ingredient is chicken, and that falls under the Poultry Products Inspection Act. So per the standard, BE disclosure would not be declared, regardless of the other ingredients contained in the formula. For the second product, the first ingredient is vegetable broth, so we look to the second ingredient, which is chicken. Again, per the standard, because of food whose first ingredient is stock, broth, water, or similar, and the second item is meat, poultry, eggs, that is exempt, and this product would not require BE disclosure. For the third product, the first ingredient is vegetable broth, so we look to the second ingredient, which is potatoes. While this product does contain chicken, when we look at the first two ingredients, we can tell that this product would not require, would require BE disclosure. It's not exempt. And for product number 4, the first ingredient is potatoes, and that item requires BE disclosure. The AMS has developed a list of bioengineered foods to help identify crops and foods that are or tend to be bioengineered. Directly from the list, you can view a PDF link to each group that provides more detail on the crop or food. These items made the list because a significant enough portion of the crops in BE form are marketed throughout the world. But just because you see a food group on this list, it doesn't mean that all varieties of that crop are BE. And just because an item isn't on this list, it doesn't mean it's exempt. But at least this is a starting point. You can see here some general crops are listed. Some specific trademark varieties like the Arctic apples or Aqua Advantage salmon are listed, and some crop varieties that were designed by direct BE to address disease resistance needs or display certain characteristics are on the list. The list of bioengineered foods will continue to be reviewed and updated by the AMS to help the industry easily identify and track bioengineered foods and ingredients. And then again, to take a look at a little more detail of an example from this list. When we view the PDF for a food group, we see general information about the crop, as well as details on specific BE varieties. So seen here, the general information on canola states that the majority of canola crops from Australia, Canada, and the US should be presumed to be BE. And that the data show that globally, a significant amount of canola crops are bioengineered, and you can see that the specific trademarked varieties are mentioned here. So this list again serves as a starting point for the status of several crops and many varieties. As you move on through learning more about the status of ingredients and need to practice your record keeping, to satisfy the requirements of the National Bioengineered Disclosure Standard, companies are required to keep records of known bioengineered foods and ingredients. The documentation must be kept for 2 years beyond the date that the food is sold or distributed. Records can be kept in paper or electronic form. And if proof of documentation is requested, a company must produce records within 5 days of receiving a request. A variety of records maintained in the normal course of business may be used to verify the BE status of a food or ingredient. The USDA has expressed that they don't intend the record keeping to be burdensome, but incorporated into the typical record keeping of a product. Records might include bills of lading, invoices, supplier or broker documentation, third-party certifications, lab results, validated process verifications, and other documentation. And determinations may show that an ingredient is a known BE material, such as use of a crop variety from the AMS bioengineered list, or documentation might support non-BE status, like organic certification, or the use of a validated refining process. Once a product is determined to contain bioengineered material, there are a variety of ways in which the disclosure can be made. Using text on the package stating bioengineered food or contains a bioengineered food ingredient, using one of the USDA approved symbols like shown here, inclusion of electronic or digital link like a QR code that includes instructions such as scan here for more food information. If using this option, then you must also include a phone number and a statement of call with the phone number listed for more food information. Or you can use a text message disclosure instructing consumers to text a command word to a listed number for bioengineered food information. Options are available for small businesses, such as providing a dedicated phone number or website address and instruction to call or visit for more food information to access the BE disclosure. Disclosure for small packages can provide shortened statements like text for food info or call for food info, and very small packaging can use an existing phone number or website. The links or the digital direction must lead customers to bioengineered information, and they're not to be used for marketing purposes or to gather information about customers. So you want to have dedicated lines or dedicated direction. And the information on the AMS website provides much more detail on the options for small companies and small packaging. So I refer you to the website there to check out more options that may apply specifically to you. As a starting point, the BE disclosure information must either be placed on a food package's information panel next to the manufacturer distributor information or on the principal display panel. If there is not enough space on either the information panel or the PDP, then an alternate area of the package can be used, but it must be one that is commonly visible to the consumer under typical shopping conditions. So you can't include it on the inside of a closed package. The BE disclosure should be large and clear enough to be conspicuous on product packaging, and for bulk foods, information on the outer packaging or signage on or near the bulk food containers can be used to display the disclosure. The disclosure statement that you use depends on the content of the bioengineered material in your ingredient or ingredients. I've shown you the bioengineered symbol, but some text options include bioengineered food, which would be used for a single ingredient item that is bioengineered, or if a food that contains all of its ingredients contain BE ingredients or material, then you could just consider that entire food a bioengineered food. Contains a bioengineered food ingredient or ingredients can be used for multi-ingredient foods that contain a combination of BE and non-BE ingredients. And derived from bioengineering is used only for the voluntary BE disclosure on foods that contain non-detectable amounts of BE material. So that might be like for highly refined ingredients that are derived from bioengineered materials, but they don't contain detectable amounts. So that lays some groundwork for the rules of the National Bioengineered Food Disclosure Standard. Remember that the USDA AMS website provides more Q&A and the full list of BE foods, and that list will be evolving. It's a great resource for you to refer to. I'll show you a few more slides on the attributes, features, and Genesis, and then we'll jump into the program. So within Genesis, we have the attribute set of features to help track properties and characteristics of foods and ingredients. Bioengineered is an existing attribute in Genesis that was added in version 11.7. And the attributes can be assigned to ingredients or to recipes in Genesis. Know that when you assign an attribute to an ingredient, that indication will carry forward to any recipes in which the ingredient is used. In Genesis, you'll see symbols that indicate the status of the attribute. So a green check mark means that yes, the attribute applies. A red slash circle means that the attribute does not apply, and question marks indicate that the attribute status is undetermined. Attributes in Genesis follow one of two rules, and these are all items in the food must have the attribute, or at least one item in the food must have the attribute. And the bioengineered attribute follows the second rule. So if one of your ingredients meets the definition of bioengineered, then your recipe will show a bioengineered attribute with the green check mark. Remember the exemptions that we discussed earlier based on ingredients like meat, poultry, dairy, and eggs. A recipe can indicate bioengineered with the green check mark if it's come forward from the ingredient, but you still want to consider if any exemptions apply for the final recipe because of any of the ingredients that do occur in that recipe. And there is an override option in Genesis. So if it's marked as bioengineered, but your final recipe doesn't need to indicate that, you have a way to override the system. So let's move on to Genesis, and I'll show you where we can see the attributes in action. So here's Genesis, and I'm going to start with an ingredient record. Open ingredient, and I'll find some fresh carrots from the USDA. So here I'm just opening this ingredient record, and here is what you may be used to seeing if you've added an ingredient or worked with ingredient records in the software. You have all of your typical fields like the ingredient name, the nutrients fields, and then we have the attributes section here. So click on that. And you can see the various sections of this screen. We see our bioengineered, which is an attribute, again, that is populated or preloaded with Genesis in terms of this attribute opens when you see the attributes section of the software. I have added another one. This is one that just in my software called No Artificial Color. So I went in and actively added that. In the bioengineered screen, if you highlight this blue eye symbol, then it brings up a summary of the bioengineered rule. So that's a good place to find just a reminder of the basics. And then here in this screen, we can see the green check mark means yes, red slash circle means no. Highlighted here are the question marks. So for this particular ingredient, the fresh carrots, my bioengineered status and the no artificial color are both unknown. And I'll want to determine those, and then I can document those. So the process or steps of just going through marking an attribute for bioengineered would be I can determine if I already know, say it's a meat product or poultry, I might just mark it as no, knowing that it falls under that exemption, and I would want to document. Here, my carrots are unknown at this point. I can click on the documentation and browse to find the documentation that I would want to store for this particular carrot. This item is organic, so I've just selected my document and attached here, and you can see now I have documentation. This is an organic item, so it would be exempt from the BE, and I'm going to mark it as no. Doesn't contain, or not exempt, but it doesn't contain bioengineered material. And just a word on the documentation. If I no longer wanted to keep that documentation, I can remove it from here, but when I attach any documentation for a record for the attributes, it will also attach it or include it in the attachments section here. So these are separate. The documentation portion of my attributes and my attachments are not necessarily affected by each other. So I still have this documentation in my attachment section for this ingredient record, but I've removed it from my attributes section. If I want to just simply add it back here, I can highlight it from my attachments click OK, and then it's right back in my attributes section. So just a note on how the documentation acts there. So I'm going to save my ingredient here. You may see this, I want to just mention this because when working with the ESHA database ingredients, this is a notification that will pop up. And there are certain fields that you cannot change or can't edit when working with an ESHA database item, such as the nutrient content, but you can save and edit the attributes. So I will select yes here that I want to save my changes to this ESHA database ingredient. And then I'm going to close this ingredient record. Then we'll move on to a recipe. So I'll open a recipe, my bioengineered webinar recipe. This is a carrot fennel salad. So it has a few things going on here. From this screen, and this is I believe this is the default setting for version 11.7 after we've added the attributes. So you'll see the attributes are listed right here on this recipe screen. And I've marked my carrots as not bioengineered, so you can see that that symbol is showing up. So this is a quick and easy way to just identify which ingredients might be indicating that they are bioengineered or not, or those that haven't been determined yet. So nice quick look here. So I've got a few ingredients that I want to work with here in the salad dressing recipe. I have a canola oil and miso, so I'm going to work with those right now. For the canola oil, I'm going to right click and open this item in the recipe. Within the recipe record, this opens the ingredient record itself. So now again, I can work with this ingredient and make some changes and save my attributes. So to begin with, it's unknown. I know that from looking at the AMS list of bioengineered foods that canola tends to be bioengineered, and I've got some documentation here. So I'm going to attach that. But what I also know about this particular canola ingredient, and I've documented and made notes here, is derived from a BE ingredient, but due to the processing, no detectable amount of genetic material remains in this product. So I'm adding that to my notes. I would want to attach proper documentation there. And then I can mark this as not bioengineered because it's falling under that highly processed exemption. Again, I'll save my changes to this ingredient. And then my recipe, going back to my recipe, that's been updated with those changes that I just made. And then again, miso contains soybean. So again, I know I want to mark that appropriately. Another way to open an ingredient record, file, open ingredient, get you to the same type of screen. And I'll just open this miso ingredient from here. Opens the ingredient record, my attributes section. Now the soybean information, I don't have documentation that it's free and clear from soybean or from detectable bioengineered content. I've got documentation that this is a BE crop. Attaching my documentation here, and I am going to check this one as contains bioengineered material. So again, save the ingredient record. And close that ingredient record. So now I've got a BE ingredient in my recipe, 2 that are marked as no, 1 that's marked as yes. And to show you where you might see that in the ingredient level in another location, if I go to edit recipe, all of the tabs that are attached to this recipe record, and I go to attributes, here in this qualifies section, now I see a green check mark that yes, this recipe is considered a BE or contains BE ingredients. So now I have an indicator there. We'll take a look at one more section in the software. I'm going to view my label. So this is the view label screen or label display it's been referred to. And within this screen, we've got the label itself, ingredient list. And because now I have an ingredient in my recipe that has qualified for BE, you can see that the symbol and text options are showing up. And you can choose from text available or whether you want to display the symbol or not within the edit label settings. So go to edit label and object properties. There's an attribute section right here. And here it will say, if it qualifies, yes, please show the symbol. If it qualifies, yes, please show the text. So you can choose from one of those. And here, selecting the text. So it shows the bioengineered food, or I might show contains a bioengineered food because not all of my ingredients are bioengineered. So that's how Genesis is handling and helping you with tracking that bioengineered information as you prepare for the compliance dates. So let me head back to the slides and we'll share a few more points of information with you. Oh, there it is. So we cover topics like this and many, many more in much more detail in our Genesis R&D training sessions. And we have some coming up. There are several classes at the ESHA Training Center in Oak Brook, Illinois. So April 28th and 30th, we have our kind of standard format training session. It can be either a 2-day, a 3-day, or just a 1-day, depending on your level of need for instruction. We have 2 days that cover the fundamentals of Genesis R&D, so the software features, and does discuss some labeling. Then the 3rd day, optional, is a more advanced setting, so you can attend all 3 days and get that full picture of Genesis. Or if you're already pretty comfortable with Genesis but do need to dive a little deeper, attend just the 3rd day as an advanced session. So you have several options there. Contact our training team to discuss which might work best for you. May 14th and 15th, we have a menu labeling training seminar. So that will be with the Genesis R&D software features and discussing labeling, but with the focus on the menu labeling features in Genesis and the regulations from the 2018 menu labeling requirements. And June 16th and 17th, we have a Canadian labeling training. So again, covers Genesis R&D with the software features, but the focus of the labeling portion of that training will focus on Canadian labeling. So we hope you will join us for one of those. Let me hand it back to Chris now, and he'll share some information on getting a hold of us, and we'll go into Q&A.
Thank you, Alicia. That's very good information. So we are including this contact us slide in the presentation that will be sent out to all of our audience for convenience. So you can reach out to us at the end of the presentation and we can help address any questions you might have. We've gotten a bunch of excellent questions from our audience so far, so we have some time to address a few of them. And as I mentioned, any that we did not get to, we will respond to them. A lot of them are compliance questions that might take some time to look up answers to. With that, we'll get started with questions. Question number 1, can a product still have a non-GMO statement?
And yes, it can. The AMS doesn't prohibit companies from participating in programs like the Non-GMO Project, and products can still use non-GMO or similar absence claims. But you want to keep in mind that the programs like the Non-GMO project, operate under a separate set of standards than the BE disclosure standard. So one thing, you don't want to have contradictory statements on your packaging. And you don't want confusing claims on products. So choose your statements carefully and accurately and consistently so that information is very clear to consumers. And then regarding the record keeping for these rules or programs, it may be that documentation that you're already using to establish something like organic certification or a non-GMO status might satisfy the record keeping required for the BE disclosure. Not necessarily, but it might. So you just want to check and make sure if you already have documentation in place that could support the BE disclosure or exemptions.
Excellent. Next question. Can you explain the exemption for incidental ingredients?
Yes. So with food labeling, we have incidental additives that are exempt for inclusion in the ingredient list, and they're described in the CFR section 101.100. So incidental additives refer to those that are present in the food in insignificant amounts and that serve no technical or functional effect in the finished product. And that might include ingredients like ingredients that are ingredients or ingredients that are contained in ingredients that are used in the finished food. So they come along with ingredients that are used in the finished food, but they're available or present in such small, insignificant amounts, and they serve no technical function. So there's really no purpose for them in the finished product of the food, and they're really not necessarily detectable. So that's one example. Another is processing aids that might be used in the processing of the product, but then they might be removed in some way before the finished food completes its processing. And then it might be ingredients that migrate from equipment but are present again in such incidental amounts that they aren't detectable in the finished product. So items like that the CFR lists or would consider incidental additives, and the CFR lists very detailed definitions there. So check out the CFR for if you need clarification there on what those definitions are. Those types of ingredients are what we're talking about. And regarding bioengineered, if the ingredients meet those definitions for incidental additives, then they are also considered exempt from BE labeling, as they would not be expected to contribute detectable amounts of genetic material. So I hope that helps get a hold of us if that's not clear to you.
I could have answered that question, but I just elected not to. Question number 3, can we use a may contains bioengineered statement?
And no, may contains bioengineered is not considered clear. So it's not allowed to fulfill the requirements of the standard. So AMS is looking for a clear declaration or disclosure that yes, it contains, or if exemptions are in place or it's been determined the food doesn't contain, then no, you can't just say it might not. You do need to have a clear disclosure.
Perfect. Has ESHA assigned ingredients to the bioengineered attribute?
We have not. So you'll want to review your ingredients and mark those with the appropriate BE indicator and maintain the proper documentation to support the BE status. And I just want to note that this is kind of similar to how we approach allergens, and that we want you to take the proper steps to identify and to document your ingredients appropriately.
Perfect. Question 5, can you export the attributes? This has been a popular question.
You can, let me show you, let me jump back into the software real quick and close out of my label view, but with my recipe open, one way that you could export attribute information, I'm clicking on the reports and then I'm exporting as text to a file. And so when I do that, choose to export text as a file, I have this list of the sections of the reports that I could choose to export. In this list, attributes is one of those sections. So I could choose to export that. Here it's in the text format and saving to a file. So that's one way. If you need more assistance, tech support can certainly respond to specific questions there.
Okay, we have a few people. Can you show how to add the BE symbol again, please?
I can. So what happened, it may have kind of appeared magically. So what happened with my recipe is once I indicated that I had an ingredient marked as bioengineered, what that set in motion was in my label view. Let me pull the label back up again. And my edit label settings were set, the attribute settings were set that if I have an ingredient that qualifies, I want to show that symbol. So that's checked, and because I had an ingredient that was marked as bioengineered, then my indicators in my edit label settings are automatically showing that display. So that's the way one way, you know, here that it's automatically pulling forward and doing some of the work for you.
Great. We have a few people asking, saying they are not seeing the attribute feature. How do I turn it on? As we mentioned, the attribute feature is available in version 11.7. So the most likely scenario is that you are not on the current version of Genesis R&D, and that's the reason you're not seeing it. I recommend contacting sales or support. You can email sales@esha.com or support@esha.com, and those links are in the contact us slide that will be included. So please reach out to our sales department and they will review your account and check with you on how to get the attributes feature added. I believe that brings us to the end of our Q&A. We do have many more questions, like I said, that we will address individually after the presentation. We will get this packaged up and a copy of the webinar sent out to you sometime today, hopefully within the next couple hours. We appreciate all of you attending and look forward to speaking with you again soon. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful day.